You're watching First Edition on this Wednesday morning, folks. Thanks for your company as always. Well, it is our time for our Wednesday backbench battle. And a very good morning to Labor MP Julian Hill and the Liberal MP Keith Wallahan. Folks, Paul Keating, he's blasted our top spy Mike Burgess for undermining the government's efforts to stabilise relations with China. Julian, to you first. Do you agree with what Paul Keating has had to say about the ASIO boss, that he should be turfed out?
No, I think he's wrong on this issue. Mr Keating's views are well known, and he's a former leader of Australia who we've talked about previously in our little segment here, who I deeply respect, and I think Keith, in many respects, expressed the same view. I dearly wish that the world had turned out as Mr Keating and the then government, then Labor government, was working towards in the 1980s and 90s. I really do. And the ASEAN summit today moves things in that direction. It's a really big moment for Australia and for deepening our relations in Southeast Asia, which was a big part of Mr Keating's focus and legacy. But it's a fact that the world and the region is worried about sabre rattling, is worried about pressure or breaking of the rules-based international order from which Australia has long benefited. And the government is focused on deterring conflict, not provoking conflict, on deterring conflict.
Yeah, you're right. The last couple of weeks we've had this panel. Paul Keating's come up a few times. It's almost timed to coincide with this. Keith, what do you make of the former Prime Minister's comments? I mean, he is revered by many in the Labor Party and around the country, but he doesn't get those security reports anymore.
No, he doesn't, and they're extremely unhelpful. And as I said previously on this show, I thought Paul Keating has interesting contributions on economics and reform. But when it comes to foreign policy in the world that we live in, I don't think he realises how things have changed. We live in a multipolar world, and an organisation like ASEAN is extremely important. And that has been conducted here in our home city of Melbourne for both myself and Julian. And we've seen also in Canberra in the Parliament, where we've had the leaders of Papua New Guinea and the Philippines address our Parliament in joint sittings. And then there was a speech recently at this summit by the Prime Minister of Singapore. And it just shows how out of touch Paul Keating is on this issue.
Yeah, Susan Lee on the program a short time ago, she doubled down on what James Patterson had to say on Sky last night, Julian, that the Prime Minister needs to come out and publicly support the ASIO boss and also distance himself from Paul Keating's comments. Do you think he has to do that?
Well, I think he already did. I mean, let's not get stuck on Susan Lee and whatever world she's living in at the moment. The Prime Minister's been very clear. But look, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee of Intelligence and Security. I work directly with the heads of the security agencies in that capacity. They're professional and they're very direct. What I would say is the government is entirely focused, laser-like focus on community security, securing Australia. The threats which Mr Burgess have talked about, we've looked under the hood, they're real. Espionage and foreign interference in our country is at record levels. They're not making this up. The threat of counter-terrorism has diminished somewhat, but is not gone. It remains present, and there's a whole range of emerging threats. The government's role, and this is what we're doing, is to make sure that the security agencies are equipped with the right resources, the right powers, and subject to proper and rigorous oversight. We don't give them everything they ask for. There is a tension, and I think Keith would agree with this, in a liberal democracy between individual liberty on one hand and collective security on the other. They're responsibilities which the parliamentarians involved take very seriously. We challenge them. It can't always be done in public. But I do have faith in Mr Burgess. The Prime Minister's expressed that. And again, it's always difficult to know what planet the Deputy Leader of the Opposition is in fact living on from day to day.
OK, switching topics. Keith, did your new Shadow Assistant Treasurer Luke Howarth bell the cat on your plans for Stage 3 tax cuts by keeping them as they are? Keeping as they were, I should say, although keeping that lower end as they are. Is this something that you'd support?
I just want to congratulate Luke Howarth on his elevation to that position, and indeed all of the others who were promoted in the minor reshuffle yesterday. Luke's just making the obvious point that bracket creep is still an issue. When you are living in a high inflation economy and you have multiple complex brackets, by design, Australians are going to be on the fast track to paying more tax. And he wants to turn his mind to that. As we've said many times, we will present our considered tax policy to the public before the election.
Makes sense, though, doesn't it? I mean, I know this has been spoken about before, but I mean, is that a way to blunt the Labor argument?
Well, we're going to do our homework and present a credible policy going forward. on tax reform that addresses bracket creep. Bracket creep is the thief in the night that affects every Australian, and we must look at it, and this government is not looking at it.
Okay. What about his other argument, chipping off your super to pay for your first home? Is that a way to get into home ownership? It's a previous plan of yours?
Next to cost of living, home ownership is a serious issue, and all consideration should be on the table.
Go for it. Go for it, Keith.
Superannuation belongs to the people and it belongs to them. So if there's choice about where they put it and it helps young people get a home of their own, that's a very good idea. I certainly think that should be part of the mix.
Why not? Why not be open to that, Julian? I mean, people's super is, at the end of the day, their money. And if it helps them get a first home, why not use that?
Let's be clear. I mean, that policy, Super for Housing, would win a gold medal for policy stupidity. You don't make housing more affordable by making it more expensive, and that's exactly what this policy would do. That's why the previous Liberal government, term after term, when some idiot backbencher floated it, would say, no, it's a dumb idea. You may as well, for a young person turning up at an auction, you may as well just suck their retirement savings out and put it in the pocket of the guy selling the house. It would push up the cost of housing. I mean, it's a double whammy, isn't it? Making housing more expensive and advantaging the people who already own property and trashing the retirement savings of low and middle income earners. I mean, you can't be clearer. But look...
Yep. 10 seconds. Wrap it up, Julian.
I mean, if Luke Howarth is the answer, God help them, what's the question? I mean, they pre-selected another bald bloke in a blue suit in Cook, and, I think Keith said the right thing on that. Why can't you pre-select women? But, I mean, really, Peter Dutton's obviously desperate. He's promoted a whole bunch of people. He said it yesterday, actually. He's promoted a whole bunch of people into assistant minister jobs that don't even exist. Keith, he's got far more than you can ever have in government.
Why didn't you get a Guernsey, Keith?
Julian started off quite polite and considered, and he's really gone into crazy town himself this morning. I think we've pre-selected an amazing candidate in Simon Kennedy in Cook. He will have an enormous contribution to make in the parliament.
Why can't you pre-select a woman, ever?
We are pre-selecting women in the party, and we certainly have here in Victoria. We have in Higgins, we have in Monash, we have women leading in Kooyong. We're certainly pulling our weight here, and we're doing it in a democratic way.
You went backwards at the last election.
But we're doing that work, Julian.
Hey, Keith, why didn't you get a Guernsey yesterday with the promotion?
I am in a very marginal seat, and I take being the representative for Menzies very seriously.
Sending a message to the boss. Are you going to put your hand up for the next one?
No, my job is to represent the people of Menzies in the Parliament, and you cannot take that for granted, and I don't take them for granted.
Okay, fair enough, Julian.
He's
Keith.
Smarter and a lot less weird than most of them. I'll give him that.
We got to go, Julian Keith. Talk to you next week.